You're listening to the Choose Your Chaos podcast with myself, Nathan Hayes. On this show, we try to explore and simplify the practices coming to the fore in health and fitness, in mental health, productivity, spirituality, and in body optimization. Together with experts, leaders, and explorers, this show is about understanding how different practices harmonize with each other, how you can adopt them, and where this is all going, as a society and as individuals. Today's podcast is with Yvonne Doherty. Yvonne is a mindset coach with her own company, Dare to Live. She does breathwork, meditations, and day-long retreats. I've worked with Yvonne, and she has a particular emphasis on how we speak to ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, and how that bleeds into the world we see around us. I have a number of questions I really want to ask her, so without further ado, let's dive into it. Hello, Yvonne.
Hello, how are we?
I'm pretty good today. I'm looking forward to this. We've worked together, so I say that up front, but I'm looking forward. I like your emphasis on kind of self-talk and the stories that we tell ourselves. That's something that's very much alive for me at the moment. So I do want to jump into that. But first, like by means of introduction, I want to put forward a little bit of theory or kind of get your thoughts on something. Because when it comes to self-talk, it basically kind of some bit comes to self-love. And in English, we only have one word for love, but the Greeks had three. They had eros, philia, and agape. So eros was the love that wanted to consume, wanted to have. This is where we get erotic love from, but it's not strictly that. It is I want it to be mine. It's some bit kind of possessive. This can be towards, this is when you kind of like over-identify with the child even. Here it's like, it's my child, it's my success, it's my achievement. And then second is philia, that's the relationship. This is fellowship. This is that reciprocal. I get something from you, you get something from me, and there's a love of the process. And then agape is what you have for a child, is I want you to bloom no matter what. I want you to burst forth. I want you to just be whatever it is. And I know I've heard your story a few times, and I know that you mention depression, but specifically you mentioned not wanting to participate, that there was like a difficulty in kind of actually playing the game of life at a certain point. And that resonates with me as well. And for me, it was that philia. It was that relationship, fellowship. Agape, I could have love for things that were beautiful. Eros, the ego wanted to have things. But philia, that thing that kind of I give something and I get something, that relationship was something personal for me. So I'm wondering, does that track for you at all? Does that division between those three types, does that make sense? But specifically, does that resonate when I say philia, that relationship type of love is, and having that for life was difficult? And what the practice was, or what your relationship is now, and what it was that kind of re-sparked that. So there are the two questions: where you are now with it, and what sparked that to re-enter into fellowship, into relationship with life.
Yeah, I think agape really resonated with me. There is that kind of blooming, that flourishing, that kind of thing. And it's that definition around self-love that I feel like I connected to most. Pema Chodron will say unconditional friendliness towards the self. And that was kind of my goal. And that's what I was working towards, because I was, very conditionally unfriendly towards myself for a long time and disconnected from life. And that fear of life, I think, was really what it was, that I didn't think I was capable of doing life, or I thought I didn't get the manual that everyone else obviously had gotten, and I was left behind in some way. So I was quite judgmental of myself and hard on myself. And the way that I started changing that and coming out of that place was, I suppose, hitting rock bottom, where I was very much like, I can't do this anymore and I want to leave life. And I started to think about how I might do that. And it was from there that it's interesting, because I tell that in my story a lot. I wanted to leave life, but I think part of me knew that I wasn't actually going to follow through on that. It was more of I really don't know what else to do. It just seemed like the only viable option, because living just seemed too hard. And it's like, well, I can't do that. So I wanted to not do that, even though I don't think I would have actually maybe acted on it. Well, the thoughts were there. I started getting help and started reconnecting to myself. And I think my relationship with life was a direct reflection of my relationship with myself, which was completely absent. I wasn't in the picture of my own relationship with myself. I was always trying to be something else, or I thought that who I was not enough, or who I was had nothing of value to contribute to life or to bring to others. So I started this recovery process, which wasn't, at the time I was experiencing an eating disorder, so I was recovering from that in theory. But realistically, for me, it was recovering my true self, because I had been disconnected from her for so very long and I didn't know who that was. And so my self-talk and the way I related to myself was very harsh and disconnected and cruel, and the kind of thing you'd never speak to anyone else like. But of course, because I didn't know myself, I didn't like myself, I was nearly like an object to myself that I was just like very dismissive of. So the recovery process was where I started transforming that relationship and starting to find that sense of the unconditional friendliness, or the wanting myself to flourish or wanting myself to bloom, and to connect to that aspect of it bit by bit. But it was very much about getting down to basics, like, what do I value? What do I care about? What are my strengths? What are my qualities? What lights me up? These questions that I had never really considered, because I was so caught up with, what should I be doing? What do other people expect of me? What is everyone else doing? As opposed to actually being connected. So I think that word connection keeps coming back to me, because I feel like it was a real severance from myself that happened. And that's where I felt completely lost, because I didn't even have my own back. And it was really reclaiming that connection and coming home to myself that transformed, yeah, my relationship with myself, the way I spoke to myself, the way I interacted with myself. And then from there, how I interacted with life completely transformed as well, because of course it did, because I was putting myself in my life, or I actually cared about life, or I realized that there was one available to me, and it didn't have to be in that restricted way that I thought it did, or it didn't have to be how everyone else was doing it, but I could actually put my own stamp on it and put myself in the picture of this life that I wanted to live. Not sure if that answers the question.
No,
Hopefully.
definitely. Actually, when you were speaking there, especially at that moment there, you're kind of describing the release. Some part of me resonated with that, but it resonated with guilt, or sorry, not guilt, grief. That to open back up, or to make oneself available, or to shed the skin, there is like a grief that goes along with it. So I suppose I'm projecting a lot there, so I apologize. I'll take the step back and I'll just ask, can you remember any specific practice at that point that that was a pivot point for you?
It was probably affirmations, which when I first heard about them, I was like, not doing that, that's ridiculous. And I found Louise Hay, and I completely cringed anytime that idea of I love and approve of myself came forward. But it was part of what I was kind of being taught, and I put my trust in the professionals I was working with in a lot of other areas. So they said, try affirmations, and I did. And I feel like that really, really served me, because at the time my head was a horrendous place to be. It was, yeah, just awful. And if even in the act of maybe writing them down and then eventually progressed to saying them to myself in the mirror or things like that, that was really uncomfortable, really didn't want to be doing it, but I knew it may potentially be beneficial. So just practicing that, speaking into existence the person that I wanted to be, and being able to do that, because there was part of me that was really connected to that hope and that maybe someday it'll be better. And it was a small part. It was like this little tiny ember initially, and I was just trying to feed that and trying to get that to ignite and grow and grow. But there's a lot of wind happening. There's a lot of other things coming in to try and tear that down. But I feel like the affirmations for me were really seeds that I was planting, and that really took root in my body and in my mind to, I am this person I want to be, I can, and just completely beginning that shift of a language that I was fluent in was very much the self-hatred. I was completely fluent in that. And this was like learning a new language of that, just not even self-hatred, just self-acceptance, or just beginning to shift away from that. And then it ended up being self-love, but it was really just trying to unlearn this old language and start speaking a new one, that word by word, bit by bit, became sentences, became the way that I now speak to myself.
Well, I just want to commend you. Don't know if I've said this to you before. Just commend you on committing to that, even when you didn't feel like it, or when you didn't see why, or anything like that, where you took the advice and you just committed to it and said, I'm doing that, because that's a real dig out. That's a real, just want to commend you on that. I don't think I've ever actually said that. So
Appreciate that.
but
Thank you.
just on the, I suppose, on the practice front, that makes total sense. in the fact that the way I understand practices now, and the way what I'm trying to kind of figure out in this show, is that there are many different practices and they pull us in different directions. But what we're trying to do is trying to find ourselves in the through line between all of them, if that makes sense. The thing that stays consistent, even when I'm being more assertive and aggressive at the gym, and even when I'm being very calm and meditative when I'm meditating, when I'm being creative and imaginative, and when I'm being like in a group or on my own, but like the kind of center, the through line is the best way of saying it. That's a Platonic sort of idea. And it makes total sense that when there's only one voice speaking, that forcing a second voice in then maybe opens up the door for further voices to come in, and that you can adopt that counsel, then you can adopt that sorry, I'm jumping ahead here because I know you do IFS, and I'm just kind of I know it's going to get there, and I'm like, so, but does that track for you, that introducing just a second voice opened up just possibility? Then they could dialogue, then they could figure each other out, and then you could get another perspective. And once it wasn't just one, did that open doors then? Is that why it was so pivotal? Is that why it was such a point there?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting, I only said this to someone recently as well. It was like, it showed me that an alternative was possible. Even if I wasn't fully ready to embrace that alternative, or if half of me was like, that's bullshit, I was still like, okay, well, but maybe that exists. There might be a version of me that does feel these things, or does feel capable, or whatever else. Because where I went to recover, everyone who worked there had fully recovered from an eating disorder themselves. So you've probably heard me saying, but that was kind of the thread of that, was just hope. And I was like, okay, if they can do it, maybe I'm not that special snowflake that won't. Maybe there is that possibility that I will get there too. Didn't fully believe in it for quite some time, but it gave me that example. And I think the same with shifting my thinking. I knew, okay, I have this example, even if I don't necessarily agree with it or fully believe it at this point, it's another option. It's another potential pathway that I could actually find myself going down. Whether I will or not, I don't know. But it was just kind of, yeah, planting those seeds. And at that time, another kind of practice, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, writing down credit, gratitude, and what have I learned today. And again, these things were planting these seeds of, there's always something to be grateful for. I can give myself credit for the simplest of things. I got out of bed today. I got dressed. And that was where I was starting from, because some days those things were not happening. So it was starting to build that accumulation of credit that, okay, maybe I'm not actually totally worthless and useless because I have this evidence here. So it was kind of just demonstrating to me that there was another alternative possible, that I could maybe keep feeding, and that this was not the only way. Because for so long, yeah, it was just that one voice that was like a fucking dictator and was just horrible. And it slowly started to be like, maybe there's something else here. And that obviously took residence and started to fill my mind a whole lot more than that old dictator who is now happily retired.
Very good. Actually, I want to come back to that because I find that an interesting turn of phrase. But I do find that gratitude is the counterbalance to the push to be more, to the call for, or the pressure for, to produce, to validate yourself, to leave a legacy, like whatever kind of shape it takes. I do feel like gratitude is that kind of like yes, move forward and push when you're pushing, and then gratitude is the, I'm pretty good. I also appreciate this. I think that's a really good duality. So I like that came up as an emphasis. But I want to come around. So you're retired dictator, because every practice has an extreme. Every practice leaves us susceptible to a failure at some point. As in, the whole point of what I'm trying to find in this ecology of practices, again, isn't to try and find like a happy medium in between two poles. It's to find like the pendulum swing. So I practice pressure here, and I practice gratitude here, and I practice sitting, and I practice moving, and I practice creative, and I practice something traditional where I surrender into it, sort of thing. And that you get the full spectrum, basically, instead of trying to find like a happy kind of ta-da moment, because that's actually why grief came up earlier, was because I realized I would never get that and have that, and I grieved that for a little bit of time.
Mm.
So for your retired dictator, perhaps the dictator is retired, and thank you. But what is the practice now? Because you're busy. You're not exactly sitting down. So I'm just wondering, like, is there just a natural kind of oomph or emphasis still there, or do you channel it? Like, I go to the gym. I full on speak to the aggressive, assertive, pressure person in the gym. So I don't know what the equivalent is, or what practice. Do you have something in that space, or how do you balance that out?
Yeah, working out has been a big one recently. So I started CrossFit last summer, and I go 3 to 5 times. I'm starting to go 5 times a week now at the moment, but that has been a really good, because for a while I think there might have been a bit of fear residue from the old dictator, that I didn't maybe like to put myself in those situations again where I would be becoming more competitive, or like that push energy. I think there was a little bit of a, I'm not sure I can trust this. Maybe not fully that, but a little bit of hesitance around it. Like, I would have run a lot over the last few years or things like that. And when I have a goal, I can definitely move towards it. But I think I was a little bit hesitant to get maybe more fully into the discipline and that kind of thing, because it reminded me of old ways. And I was like, I don't want to get too whatever. But I've actually found that it's a really beautiful balance, because I think I can be busy, but I can also be kind of all over the place, and I need structure, but I don't naturally gravitate towards creating structure myself. So if it's in place for me and I can just show up, happy days. I think otherwise, if it was left to me, I just kind of be a bit everything will get done, but it'll be all over the place. And that works well in a sense. But I found having that opportunity, I suppose, to be maybe in that masculine energy, or in that kind of doing first thing in the morning, or it's usually first thing in the morning, it sets me up nicely to kind of sort of get out of my system, but sort of kind of activate and wake me up in a sense. And then everything can flow from there, because it gives that kind of tick box of, okay, I've got this in place, and then everything kind of can come from that, if that makes sense.
Also, you compartmentalize it, and it gives you gratitude at the same time, so it almost counteracts itself in the practice. Is that like?
Yeah. And it's like it ticks so many boxes, because it's really community oriented as well, because it's like classes, everyone's really supportive of each other. So there's a lot to it. I know one of my mentors has said before, like with our 6 core needs that, say, Tony Robbins will describe, if we find something that ticks a few of those, it becomes really nourishing for us. So for me, it's like, it's connection, it's variety, and certainty, because it's the same kind of times, but it's something different every day. So it takes those, and then you have the connection as well. So you have that community aspect. So I feel like with some of the practices that I engage in now, typically they're related to needs, values, and things like that, more so, that I'm like, okay, what do I need? And then there's a practice I know is there to fulfill that need, or where my values may be lacking, or I haven't been tapping into them as much as I'd like to be. There's something there that I can utilize as well.
Right. Okay. Very good. I totally resonate with like all of that. So I love that. I suppose I'm hesitant, because I know this just tees it up, and it seems like such an easy question. But so if that is collective, and that is your community orientation, and that is one end of the pendulum swing, when do you full on pendulum swing towards the individual, the more isolated practice?
Yeah, very often, and it's really needed. Yeah, because I like, how do I say this without sounding how I feel like it might sound? But I take on a lot of people's energy. I would be quite an empath, and I do really enjoy my own company now, which obviously in the past was a different case. But I do feel the need for complete stillness sometimes, and it's Vipassana meditation is kind of just
Yeah.
calls me, like, so often, where it's like the complete opposite of CrossFit, with the loud music and the people and the activity, and it's just like sitting in complete silence and stillness. And part of me just really craves that so often. And even sometimes we're like, oh, I need to go meditate, or I feel like that. But I don't want to do anything where people are talking, because that's too much for me at that point. I'm just like, nope, just complete silence, just my breath, just being with myself. So it is, yeah, that's a complete pendulum swing to the other side of just like nothingness. And it's bliss as well. Like, it works really beautifully hand in hand, I suppose, with that.
Yep. I knew you were going there, so.
Set
But
me up.
okay, so I know. But so I'm just going to run through. So John Vervaeke has a rough blueprint of an ecology of practice. There is a few things that I think I want to add and stuff. One is writing and speaking. I find them a duality that I find pulls me in different directions. It's quite good. But to go through, you've meditation and contemplation. So you're on about meditation there. Contemplation wise, when do you let the imaginal take over? So I've said this before, but I'll say it again, in that the imagination and fantasy are two different things. Fantasy is when your imagination runs off, or okay, I won't use the word imagination, when your mind runs off and isn't contacting reality. If I was Superman, I'd fly around the moon and I'd go out to space and I'd swallow a sun and I'd do whatever else, and it's just fantasy. It doesn't affect anything. But if I used my imaginal headspace and I was like, if I was Superman, what would this room look like right now? My house would look very delicate very quickly. I'd be very aware of just how fragile life itself is, perhaps, and then that's how it contacts reality. It changes, it stretches my perception in a certain way. So I want to make that separation, because I know sometimes we can, if we do start talking about something spiritual and we do start talking about guides and stuff like that, because that's really kind of what I'm working with at the moment, is having dialogue with different objects and different things, and I find it really good. So I just have to preface that, because it's such a boogeyman. The minute you talk about this stuff is like, but once it's in relationship with reality and it stretches you and helps you grow, that's what I'm on about. That's what I'm referring to in the imaginal space or contemplation space. You contemplate what it's like to, or there's different versions of this. So I'm going to pose that question to you. What, when I say contemplative practice, do you have something in that slot, or what speaks to you there?
Yeah, I think what came to mind first was just these conversations that I'll have with my partner, where we're just questioning everything basically all the time. And how do you think this works? And what would this be like? And just really expansive, or trying to figure things out, I think is definitely something that is inherent in me, that I want to figure stuff out, or I want to explore, again, the possibilities, which I think comes back to even where I started with recovery, just knowing that there were some possibilities. I feel like that was just the beginning of this complete, like, what else could there be with everything? Is because we're presented with so many like stories like that. I'd say we have self-talk, we have mind stories, but then I kind of open that up, everything's a story, and we all just agree on it, and we go along with these stories, and that's how life exists. So challenging a lot of those stories, or what would it be like if we didn't buy into this story, or how would we like to potentially live or do things? So definitely conversations. And also I would do like a practice, I think it's called scripting, but I don't know if that's correct, but basically just, yeah, my dream life, what would that look like? And I'll write it all out. So I am whatever, I'm a world-renowned speaker, I have best-selling books, or like all of these things, I travel the world, like where would I like to go? And just, I suppose, exploring the possibilities, because that's something I did a lot in recovery as well, and a lot of that stuff has come true. So I want to keep on that trajectory and just exploring those possibilities, writing them down. So definitely writing and speaking, kind of as you had said, I think they would be my go-tos, and I would feel the absence of them if I'm not going into those areas. I feel like I'm fit to burst nearly, in a sense, like I need to talk about something, or I need to, just explore or go to those places, because I don't know, things can be very mundane otherwise, or you get caught in this, just like, oh, this is how it is. But I like to, yeah, push the boat a little and challenge what else there could be.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely you have to allow new information in and then focus it down, and then allow in and then focus it down. That is that's the road to mastery. It's not just focus, because you get stuck. And that's, anyway, that is another space. That's brilliant. Okay, I like that you brought up that scripting and that speaking to your future self, because funnily, that starts off as fantasy. As in, you say, like, what's your dream life? And you come off with the most extra, just the most ridiculous sort of image. But if you give it the space and you actually flesh out the details, then it starts to meet reality. And then you start to get this beautiful relationship with you and your future self. And I've mentioned this in a video previous as well. There's a book probably behind me somewhere called The Divine Double, which says that that's what your soul is. It's your relationship with your present self to your future self, because you can't just give up your present self and become your future self, you have to surrender into this process of this relationship between, and that's the soul. I love that definition. So,
Yeah.
but what I want to bring you around to, because, no, okay, I'll leave that thread. There's a thread here where I want to come back to contemplation and ask how and why IFS didn't make that there. But I will go through this list of John's. So we've contemplation and meditation, we've sitting, and we've movement. So you've done that with your Vipassana meditation, is it? And
Yeah.
the gym. You have collective and individual. And then you have creative and absorptive. So creative is when the energy comes purely from you, and absorptive is when you surrender into a tradition and try and perhaps express yourself within the confines of the boundary. So how do those two strike? Where do you find a balance between those two, and how do you counteract them or balance them out?
I think creative would be things like poetry, posts, I suppose, content, writing, things like that, but also dancing. I feel like that would be a creative expression in some sense, where it's just maybe moving through what is within me and kind of putting a form
100%.
to it.
Yeah, 100%.
Absorptive, I feel like I would like an example of that. I don't know if I fully know what that would
So
be for
this
me.
is so I got really big into martial arts, so that was kind of one there. There is even traditions within practices. So even the Vipassana meditation
Mm.
might fulfill that role, where you're some bit aware of the ancestry that came before you, the weight of the people carrying this practice, this tradition, this, and they brought it with a certain energy. Like I find this on pilgrimages. I remember climbing Croagh and getting up to the top and just really feeling the weight of just how many people did that, and the weight each and every, like, okay, maybe not every one of them, but the amount of true souls that made that journey with intent just kind of floored me for a bit.
Mm.
So that's kind of the texture of what an absorptive kind of practice kind of would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, maybe more the kind of spiritual practices then, yeah, like things like meditation. And I connected with Buddhism a lot through, I remember when I was kind of in the height of it, like YouTubing or Googling stuff. And there was this monk that came up talking about anxiety and depression. I was like, oh, maybe that'll help. And I loved his stuff for probably about 9 years after. So there'd be those kind of things that I tap into, or like ancient wisdom, or yeah, kind of taking in, I suppose, those sort of things. And then in terms of practice, it probably would just be meditation. Also probably connecting with nature. And I don't know if that
Nature.
would go in that line, but yeah,
Yeah.
hikes to the sea. I often will just need to go to the sea. I'll just get that. Okay, it's time. I need to just go out there. And yeah, like that kind of just being conscious of it as nearly almost as if that's the ancient thing, I suppose, because it is. It's always been there, just getting a little bit caught up in, yeah, just kind of thought, I suppose, as well around that, and how it ebbs and flows and what's going on with it, and all the different people who've probably sat there looking at it at the same time, or even like looking at the moon. And I know my sister in New Zealand looks at the same moon, or I don't know, there's things like that that just connect into nature in that sense. Or yeah, maybe those would be the kind of things.
100%. Well, I feel as if just the practices that we do, as in like all of them, the ones that we've taught and that you're learning, and this brings me back around to IFS. So this is, because that is a system, that's a tradition, that is someone
Mm.
else's thing, and you're integrating it in, and you're allowing it to come in, as opposed to the creative where you're expressing and it's coming out. Like there's a dance and a thing between that, where sometimes the tradition can bring out the creativity because it gives you the boundary and it gives you everything else, I find anyway. So
Yeah,
but
totally.
which directly brings me into IFS, because IFS is a very interesting tradition. I know he doesn't I know that he doesn't credit Young for parts work, essentially, but I resist that. As in, Young was an absolute titan, and so this has been around for a while. Now he's edited and he's made it something, but just there is a tradition here. This isn't as new as everyone thinks it is, and all the rest. But it is artful. It is a very beautiful practice. So can I ask you to explain what IFS is and ask for like one or two practices perhaps that you find in it, or really one or two characters that you find in it that I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on.
So in terms of defining it, I suppose IFS is internal family systems, and it's based on this idea that we are multifaceted. We're not just one. We are made up of all these little parts, and they may be in conflict. And you may notice even how we speak, we do speak to this. Part of me wants to do this and part of me wants to do that. And quite often we can experience that inner conflict. We're like, oh, this voice is saying this and this voice is saying that. It's not like we have these different people within us. They're just different parts of us. And sometimes that can be kind of pathologized in multiple personality disorder or things like that. We all have multiple personalities, and they are living within us, and they are all doing their best to protect us. And I think this is where I suppose I really gravitated towards it, because I was doing my own work with myself and looking at shadow, and I would keep referencing this part, and it was like it was in my side, and it was this block, and it wouldn't let me be nice to myself, essentially. And so I needed to get to know that part. And that part was protecting a younger self. So we tend to have these protectors, and they'll protect an exiled part of us who was not able to be themselves at some point, and so came up with ways of protecting in order to not feel the feelings that would have come up when we were kind of shunned or suppressed or put down, or you can't do it like that, or you shouldn't be crying, or whatever else might have come up. So I found this part that was really just harsh inner critic, really, really mean, but felt so familiar. And I felt like, well, how else am I supposed to speak to myself, or how else am I going to get myself to do anything or whatever, because it had become so normal. And this voice was kind of always there, that I was very used to it. But working with someone else, I started realizing, okay, this part is holding me back from what I really want. And I do want to be nicer to myself. And it just kept shutting it down. So the work that you would do in parts work is essentially just opening a conversation with that part. I'm like, hello, is it okay if I ask you a few questions? And they don't tend to trust us straight away. So it is a little bit of practice, and ultimately just trying to understand where they're coming from. What job are you doing for me? What are you afraid might happen if you no longer do that job? In what ways are you protecting me? Or what age do you think I am? Is often a question that you'll ask that part, because that part tends to think we are a lot younger than we are. And that's why it's still doing the role of protecting us, because it doesn't know that we are grown up now and can actually protect ourselves, or have learned new ways since that part essentially got its job in the first place. So that part might be like, you're 10. And it's like, no, I'm actually nearly 30. And we have to try and explain that. And sometimes even that questioning part, that little introduction to this is who I am now, really softens the part a little bit, because it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And we kind of get them up to speed in that, yeah, and I can do this and whatever else. And it's really just getting to know these parts of ourselves, because they are doing a job and they are trying to protect us. And it's not that we want to necessarily get rid of them, but that maybe we can unburden them from doing these jobs that are taking a lot of energy and that are essentially keeping us stuck, or maybe in a position that we don't want to be in. And they can do another job for us, because they all are quite useful. And there's a reason we have all of these within us, and they have a lot of gifts and a lot of talents, and they can be very, very resourceful. But they've just learned to do a job that is maybe not super resourceful. And it's not about trying to be like, okay, you're gone, but what if you were to protect me or look after me in this way? Or would you be open to that? And you kind of get to that after a while. But the main thing is really just starting to get to know them and understand them. Because there'd be another part I'd have that loves being distracted. And how can I have loads of different things going on? And it's because I feel or have created an identity around doing things and being busy. Interesting, that came up. But like having a lot of stuff on the go. And so even if I'm not necessarily being productive, because I've tied my worth up with being productive, this part will come in and just distract me. And it's like, oh, we're looking at this and this and this. So I can feel as if I'm being productive, which helps me to feel at ease within myself, because I feel good about myself when I'm doing things, sort of thing. So it's even getting familiar with that part and be like, okay, like, what are you up to there? Or how are you helping me out? And okay, I understand. And ultimately, the biggest benefit I found from this is the shift from shame to compassion. because for so long, if I noticed, okay, part of me is being harsh on myself, I get so annoyed and I get so frustrated. It's like, how am I still doing that? Or why am I still doing that? And then when I realize I'm still doing that because that part doesn't know that I'm okay now, or I'm still doing that because I learned to do that because it was actually really helping me, then I can have more compassion for that part and be like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. That makes sense. Fair play to you. I appreciate your efforts. And it really softens everything and just makes life so much easier to navigate when you notice. And then if you know, okay, this part is coming up now, that makes sense for it to come up. You can talk it down. You can say, is it cool if you just step aside for a second? I'm going to try and do this myself. And the more trust that you build with them, the more they do calm down and trust you. And ultimately then you feel more whole as a result, because you're in touch with yourself and you know yourself better, and you're also not shaming yourself and getting frustrated quite so much, which can really it's disconnecting. Shame is really disconnecting from ourselves, whereas this is more connecting and compassionate.
I love that. I really enjoyed like IFS and Pirates Work. Just the best imagery I've had for the one where you're referencing, where it kind of gets stuck in time, is where you have the knight outside a door and the princess in the room, and that at some point the knight has to turn around and actually check on the princess. Yes, his job is to always keep a vigilant eye at what could be and what is and all the rest. And fair play to you for doing your job. But is the princess actually okay? And I think just the duality, as in like, think of this when we were just, the last thing we were talking about was tradition and creativity. As in tradition can absolutely crush, but it can also afford. So it's just like, as long as they're dancing between, like, I do find that beautiful and brilliant. But tell me a little bit about the parts work, because I feel this kind of links into the full ecology of present, like what we're working at day to day, I suppose, is the when the part is being misplaced. So it's not that it's outdated. It's what, so you said there where you've tied the identity with like being productive and doing and being active and all the rest. And then that's good while at work, but then it bleeds into time at home, relaxation time, and then it's misplaced. It just kind of seeps out the edges, out the hinges, like whatever it is, it's just a little bit comes out. And it's like, no, 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 no. Thank you, but you belong here. And I appreciate that. And I'm just kind of curious, what sort of questions would you ask there, I suppose?
To the part, or
Yes,
anything?
to the part when you catch it in the wrong space. It's not that it's out of time. So it's not like, what age am I? It's not that question. What would be the question where, why are you here? Like, would that be the question? Because
Probably, yeah, it is. I suppose it's dropping into it. So it would probably be kind of eyes closed, just tapping in. Okay, hi, I see you. I noticed you coming up. I really want to be focused at the moment, but I'm noticing you're looking to distract. I'm just wondering what you might be trying to distract me from, or that kind of thing. And just again, coming from a place of understanding and curiosity, I think works best. Or it's not like, I know what you meant with the why are you here, but I think tone and stuff even matters when it's like, what job are you doing at the moment, or things like that, as opposed to like, I don't want you here, because they don't like that. And you want to be kind of just engaged in a sense. And then would it be okay if you step aside for a second, or something that Dick Schwartz, who does it, like he has kind of examples of in session, and it might be like, I'm just going to pop you inside in this waiting room for a second. And sometimes that's to speak to other parts, or sometimes it's to just go ahead and do what you might need to do, and I'll come back and get you when I'm done. It is very much nearly like talking to a child, and it's like this child wants to be a bit disruptive and take you away, and you're like, oh, I hear you, yeah, you've got a lot to say about this. Is it okay if we chat about that in a few minutes, or if I come back to you in a second? And I will be back. And again, that's part of the trust building, is that you do come back to it and you say, no, I did my thing, and thank you for cooling the jets for a little bit so I could go and do the thing. How did that feel for you to be kind of put to the side? Is that okay? And then it is just kind of nurturing that relationship a little bit. So I think just, is it okay if you park it for the moment, would probably be the first one. Or it's like, I'm noticing you have a lot to say about this. Do you want to tell me about it? And then is it okay if I get back to doing it myself? It's a little bit of that, just kind of like, I hear you and I prefer not to, but in a gentle way where you're not exactly saying that.
Yeah, I love how much compassion your language has there, where it is very much it's very much meeting it as a person. As in,
Mm.
because when we're dealing with ourselves, it's just like it's me, and this is, as I said, the imaginal space, as in like um I'm using this to stretch myself so I can understand reality better. Whether there's like literally a figure in my head like is not the question. It is just by compartmentalizing and visualizing it this way, it stretches me out. But really letting go of ownership of it almost and treating it as a separate person. Like I really appreciated it. That's just really, yeah, just compassion. It's really good. So I want to actually ask on that point, do you flesh out these characters? Because I'm noticing this when I'm doing characters here a little bit. It's like what would, and like it starts off with your grand symbols like Buddha or Jesus or Vishnu. I don't Shiva actually is the one that really, if I was being honest. But or anyway, won't get into full-on mythology, I suppose. But it starts off with those kind of grander ones. And then it can go to kind of more personable ones, like personal ones, like my mom, my dad, my sister, like these personal relationships, and just kind of holding them on my shoulder. Um, but now I'm starting to get to the point where I'm really starting to flesh out my own characters. And they just kind of develop. And it's just, I didn't expect this guy to be funny. I didn't expect this guy to be serious. Like, why? I'm still figuring them out, essentially.
Mm.
Um, and it's introduced a lot of play, which is the whole reason I'm kind of continuing with it. It's been a lot of fun. But so do you really flesh out these characters? Like, do you dress them? Do you visualize them in a time frame or in some sort of culture, or like yeah, just explain to me just how detailed these characters are.
Not overly. It's interesting you're saying that because I feel like not a whole lot, and it's more. I think I do just see them as different versions of myself. So some might just be a really young version of me. I feel like it's all me is what I would characterize them as. But when I did start looking at this, like where the coach kind of guided me through it a bit more, it was more just even trying to tap into what that part felt like. And I know there was like it was like a concrete block was sitting here, and there was that was a part of like, oh, don't say that or don't express yourself, and that kind of stuff was that part was trying to keep me silenced, I suppose, in some ways. And they would be, I think, nearly shapes and stuff were easier to connect to initially. And then the more kind of I understood of it, it just became more different aspects of me. And I found it maybe even that's where the compassion came in as well, because I felt the connection to these younger versions of me that felt the need to create these ways of protecting me because I didn't feel safe or whatever else was happening for them. So I think I found, yeah, just it's all me. It's about as
Interesting.
imaginative.
No, I actually really like that because, as I said, I really did like admire the kind of the compassion that was in the language, and it very much was the being mode, not the having mode. As in, like as I said, it was like very much a separate thing almost, but somehow
Mm,
that's linked into by identifying it in you. That's really interesting because the whole reason I do kind of flesh these out is so that I can give them more of a being mode sense.
mm.
So I'll have to chew on that because I don't want to treat them like figures. I don't want to treat them like little action men or something like that, where it's like I have this character and look at him and I'll share him around and like look how cool this is. It very much is the presence, the felt sense. So just I like that you're able to get there even without the detail. Like that's interesting. So, I am some bit aware that we're coming up to the end of the time here, so I have just a few questions that I like to close the show out with. And the first one is brilliant because it is almost, it very much just feeds into this conversation we just had, which is, who would make your counsel? So in your council of sages, in your council of gurus, the people who advise you and who kind of debate on what the next route is, who would make the council?
Interesting. Like can be anyone, I assume.
Yes.
Buddha would be there. Um, who would make my council? Just Buddha. No, who else would there be? I'm thinking of like different people, like Joe Dispenza's coming to mind, Bruce Lipton. Mainly, I want to know the things that they know. But I feel like there must be others. I don't
If I
know.
could actually bring you around then to the three types of love. So if you're on about you just want to know the things that they know, that's eros. That is the I want to have. Philia then is the who do I want to converse with? Who do I want fellowship with? Who's the peers? And then agape is I'm just so glad the world has you. I suppose, or I want you to bloom into you because you are amazing.
Mm.
So I don't know. Buddha might fall into all three.
Yeah.
That's why we signify it. We put it into one word, but like as in spreading that out, and it's a rich enough topic that we should have more language around it, I think.
Yeah.
So I bring you back around to that just to see if that pulls you in any other direction.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, I'd like to converse with Brene Brown, I feel like, because she's been very significant in my own learning and development. So just have a little chat with her. We were saying conversation as well. I was like, well, Carl will be there, my partner. We'll be talking about stuff in the council. Um,
Oh, that's
yeah.
beautiful because like you've the most detailed version of him as like as a person, as in like the symbols are great and they can be kind of pure energies or something like that. But the more personal relationships have that like nuance where um there's a different flavor to that. It's just not as simple and can be very insightful as well. They're two different. They're good. They're good. They both have pros and cons. There's something to that. um.
Ramdas. I would
So
close it out.
sorry.
Ramdas would close it out. That would be my last person.
Oh, very good. Okay, Ramdas.
Yeah.
That is uh for some reason in my head he's like a cheeky guru.
Yes. So much. I don't know what it is. I'm just like, yes. If there was one person that would be like, yeah, like to learn from, it would probably be Ramdas or just to hang out with. What a hero.
Okay, actually perfect, because that brings into the second question, which is in this space of trying to help ourselves, better ourselves, and all the rest, it can get quite serious. But play is very important to get us to continue and keep playing the game. And I do feel like Ramdas had that. So I'm curious, because it's very hard to like manage this throughout everything. And sometimes there's a time for push and sometimes there's a time for stillness and discipline. But then sometimes there's this play as in like along the way. And I know I lose it basically. That's kind of what the caveat I'm trying to give here is I lose it and I have to pick it up and I have to, everything moves. So just what aspect of life at the moment are you trying to introduce more play into?
I think the one that's actually happening is in my mindset. And that's been a really big shift in terms of finding humor in myself. And I think that's really coincided with finding that compassion. So even the last year, I suppose, I've been working with a coach, and some of the things she'll say is like, you're so hard on yourself, you put so much pressure on yourself, like, Jesus, like, can you not have any compassion? And I started getting real mad that I can't have any compassion and there's something wrong with me and all of this, because I was just so hard on myself. And then we started working with different things, obviously, and you could hear the compassion coming through. And I think that's just kind of spread into different areas, even in like in my mind. When I notice maybe thoughts coming up or things, I can just laugh at them so much more easily. Or it's just like, oh, you have to do this, and I'm like, oh, I have to do this. It's just like making nearly a mockery of it, where it's like it seemed so serious before and it was like so regimented, and it felt so yeah, it could still be quite critical and still quite like, of course this is the way we have to do it, real regimented and stuff. And instead of that now, it's just more like, bit of a joke, or I'd notice myself thinking about loads of things. I'm like, I am gas. Like, listen to these things I'm saying to myself. And I just, yeah. So even bringing in that lightness and play, I suppose, even with mindset, but I think it's still something that I want more in day to day. I think, yeah, definitely have humor in a lot of things. And that's been really important. What I noticed, there is that part of me that's still a bit averse, is the word coming to mind, but a little bit averse to that idea of play and fun, or like that sort of stuff, like just doing things for the sake of enjoyment. I think I tend towards, I need to get something out of this, or I want to achieve or learn or grow in some way, as opposed to just like just having a laugh and just being in that playful energy. I think that's, it's coming through in my mind, but I think in terms of an actual activity or practice, it's still probably a work in progress a little bit.
Very good. It is, play is such it's so core, but it is so difficult. To like truly negotiate with ourselves, because it does start at the bottom. It does start from like a primal energy. It has to start from the bottom, where it has to grab our attention even when we're not looking. So it has to go for something where, yes, I want that. As in, like, I went to the gym, and it's like every guy that went to the gym first went to the gym because he wanted to look godly, like the Greeks, like the Romans, and impress all the girls and all of the rest. And then it becomes a game of self-improvement and push, and then it becomes this relationship, and then it becomes this practice where you kind of meditate. And like, as I said, like, that's really taken up the role of me talking to my more assertive and aggressive self, and then also introducing like softness into that, which has opened, it's just widened the spectrum, I suppose. So I do, I don't begrudge anyone having to start from the bottom and having it be like a crude joke, and you're just like, okay, if that's the best joke you can come up with, yeah, we'll talk. Like, at least you're having fun. At least you're having fun. I just know when I'm minding kids in care and stuff, like sometimes they can be crass. So I will bring it to the last question then. With the mindset of trying to find this full range and building that ecology, building this practice where things balance each other out, and you don't end up getting left with just one side, with just with something off balance, but like with just one side of, with just one voice, perhaps, to put it to your story, like where it is just the meditative. I have to be quiet all the time, and then I never get to play and be imaginative. So with that, from that perspective, what advice would you give for building an ecology, for building a full set that harmonizes?
I think really just what came to mind straight away was getting to know yourself and taking some time to be with yourself and start dropping into, how does this feel for me? One of the questions I would ask myself a lot, does this make me feel heavy or light? Is this coming from a place of freedom or fear? Love or fear kind of taps into that as well. But just tuning into yourself and getting familiar with that, because your practice may not be the same as everyone else's practice, and that's okay. And I think that would have been a thing that I grappled with a bit. It's like, oh, I should be meditating, or I should be journaling, or I should be, and like, not from a place of should. Get rid of the should, it's my least favorite word, and come back to what would help me feel more like me, or what helps me feel more in balance. What am I really craving right now? What do I need right now? And we can't know those things, I think, until we do start tuning into ourselves and tapping into ourselves. When I was kind of in that process of recovery, sometimes I just feel off. I'm like, I don't know why I feel off. And I'd talk to my therapist, and she's like, when's the last time you wrote? God, it's been ages. There you go. And so often that was the thing, is like, I just wasn't doing the things that I knew I needed because I was minimizing them, where I was like, that's not that important. If there's something in you that is called towards a practice, and that's important. And if there's something in you that needs to be, say, expressed or contemplated or sat with or whatever it might be, it's allowing those things and dropping into that, even if maybe not everyone else is doing it, or even if you've already done it that day, or whatever it is, kind of letting go of any rules around it. I mean, just kind of a bit more of a fluid approach. My hands are doing this, you can't see them, but a bit more of a fluid approach to it, where it's like just noticing and tapping into yourself. And like I kind of said earlier, values and needs might help to instruct that process or inform, or maybe I could do with a bit more of this, or maybe this would be of benefit to me, or maybe I'm feeling called towards this, and listening to those calls, not just being like, oh, I feel called towards that, but I'm going to keep typing because I'm busy. It's like listening to that and tuning into that and allowing that voice to be important, because that's where you're going to find your balance, your center, your groundedness is in the flow between these things.
Yeah, beautifully said. I just it strikes me. I've asked this question a few times, and it strikes me that it is really like a sensitivity to it. It's very much kind of how receptive are you to that voice.
Mm.
And I just don't know what the advice is for developing that kind of taste, like a palate, I suppose, for having that relationship. It's very tricky, and I don't know in myself what exactly I followed to find. And I follow duty way too often, and I've far too many shoulds. So I'm not here saying any of that, but just from where I was to where I am, I don't know what it is I'm following. So thank you so much, because every time I do get to ask people that question, it does just circle around that space. And even though there's no kind of gotcha moment to it, it does help me kind of feel it out. And by the way, I also loved, I had to write it down as well. You were on about what's making you light or what's making you heavy. And I have one that I got from Spinoza, and it was that what is giving you life and what is taking life? When do you feel vitality? Because I feel like that's something that, I don't know if that's something that I'm really trying to channel in a good way. So, Yvonne, thank you so much. I will give you any kind of closing statement you want to make here before we close out.
Ooh, I don't know. Thank you for having me. And I suppose just if there's one takeaway, be nice to yourself and allow yourself to be on the journey of finding your own center, your own balance, your own practices that serve you best in your most authentic expression, and enjoy it.
Couldn't have said it better. That is brilliant. Thank you so much.